Did you know that many immigrants, and especially the children of immigrants, face a lot of challenges while making efforts to adjust to their new homes? Did you know that many immigrant children grow up to experience racism, discrimination, and a whole feeling of being different? On today's show, we'll be talking about facing adversity and finding a voice for advocacy.
This is my family. This is my brother Hayu. This is my dad.
Born of Ethiopian immigrants in Vancouver, Agatu Ali relocated with her mother to face an early life in Ethiopia.
Hayu, Akam J, Analani.
Akam.
Means hello.
She later rejoined her father in Vancouver at the tender age of 5, and she started learning English and attending school like most kids her age. She was the English language tutor for her parents, who only spoke the native language of Otomo.
My name is Sharafuddin Ali. Agartu is my daughter. She's very nice and very talented.
She soon became the family's spokesperson, as she would help her parents and siblings through immigration processing and interaction with government agents. She found her voice as an advocate, but it was not enough to help navigate the challenges of growing up as a young, black Muslim girl. She looked different, she felt different.
By that definition, I cannot attest to ever having one. Home as a structure has become a dusty memory left on the doorsteps of unknown continents and unknown docks.
She stood up in the face of discrimination and racism, and once again, she found her voice, this time resonating with deep passion. At 15, Agatu became the youngest poet laureate to have emerged from the city of Victoria.
You and those cuts on your leg, you and those train tracks.
She currently splits her time between the demands of being a grade 10 student and the responsibility of connecting with vulnerable youth in the community. Her mentor, Jeremy Loveday, is a councillor with the city of Victoria and the founder of the Victoria's Voices Youth Art Festival. He supports youth like Agatu and helps them impact others through poetry. Welcome, and thank you for staying connected with us on Community Connect. It is always a pleasure to bring you the exciting stories of people making a difference in the community. I am Ruth Mojid. Joining us today are Jeremy Loveday and Agatu Ali. Jeremy is a councillor with the city of Victoria. He was elected to the city council in 2014 and has been active in council decisions that impact the community. His passion is to see Victoria become a more affordable, sustainable, and inclusive city. He is the founder and president of the Victoria's Voices Youth Art Festival and a champion of the City of Victoria's Youth Poet Laureate program. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jeremy.
And thank you very much for having me on today.
Agatu is the City of Victoria's 2018 Youth Poet Laureate. She is the youngest person ever to be chosen for that role. She's a grade 10 student at Victoria High School, and she is an advocate for vulnerable youth and the literary arts. She shares her story and connects with the community through poetry. It is such a pleasure to have you here today, Agatu.
Thank you for having me, Ruth.
So Agatu, I know you were born here in BC, you were born in Vancouver, and then you had to move to Ethiopia with your parents at an early age. What was that experience like?
Well, obviously, me being so young, Ethiopia, being raised in Ethiopia was my first memories of home. That's where I grew up, and I was just like every other kid. I was just doing what every other kid does. When I came back to Victoria when I was around 5, it was more of me realizing the different social aspects and me integrating into the society of BC and Canada from a very young age. And it was a very unique experience because I was not an immigrant and I was not a refugee. I was born here, but I still had to go through the process of learning English and going into the childcare system instead of me being with a family member and me having a very close social ties with my family and me being raised by them.
So in that case, certain things were in place that made you feel very different. Like you didn't feel like you belonged so much.
Yeah. Well, obviously I was very different because of my skin color, maybe my religion, but back then it wasn't a very prominent factor of what I was and how I conducted myself because, again, I was just a child. But kids, they don't have very deep-rooted hate. It's more of maybe they are misinformed or their parents haven't educated them on different cultures and different people. So it was a lot of confusion, and it was a lot of, oh, how come you're so dark if you're born here? And it's a lot of them not understanding that you can be Canadian without being white.
Right. So that education piece is something that you feel was lacking, and it created a huge gap. I also know that you had to take ESL classes, like when you moved here, even though you were speaking English, but you had to go learn to speak English all over again.
When I was younger, obviously, I had to go to the ESL classes to just learn basic English and learn how to communicate with teachers and peers. But around when I was in grade 5, I was at the same English level as everyone else, but I was still required to go to those classes over and over again, even though I was Canadian. I was Canadian, and I spoke as well of English as anyone else.
Jeremy, I'd like for you to speak to that idea of the lack of understanding and the need for education within the community. What is the role of parents and teachers in educating themselves first and educating the children as well?
It's an interesting question, and I think that I'm not a parent and I'm not a teacher, but I do see that as a culture and as a society, we need to shift to do a lot more to make sure that we aren't instilling harmful ideas and sort of closed-minded ideas into younger generations. So that means educating ourselves and making sure that it's infused into our institutions.
You mentioned you're not a parent or a teacher or something, but you'd worked in after-school childcare, and that's how you actually connected with Agatha in the first place. But what was that like, having to relate with younger people at that level?
I love working with kids. As Gertrude mentioned, there isn't any sort of deep-seated hate. There's a sense of beauty and a sense of just that anything is possible in one's imagination. And I think that we need a lot more of that in adults.
So Agatha, I know that you also have siblings. You have 2 sisters, 2 older sisters who were born in Ethiopia and had to move back here with you. So you were born here, you were born Canadian. What privileges do you think your Canadianness afforded you compared with your sisters who had to come as immigrants and just had to, navigate all of that?
I have a lot of disadvantages, but I also have a lot of privileges. Me being born here and coming back at such a young age to where I could easily integrate and easily learn the language and maybe be accent-free. So when my sisters came, it was a bit of a harder transition, them being closer to adulthood and them being older and having accents. And I have that line of defense to be able to say, oh, I was born here. If someone says, oh, go back to where you came from, I can say, I was born here, you were born here. Unless you're Indigenous, you're not from here.
How long have they been here for?
Around 10 years.
And they still have those challenges.
Yeah.
That's got to be tough.
As a city, I think that we need to do more to make sure that we are a welcoming and inclusive place. And that means that when newcomers are coming here, and that the city is reaching out and going to where people are. So whether that's at a cultural community center, whether that's in a place of worship, making sure that the city is going there and asking questions.
So what I'm hearing you say is there is an onus on the person coming, on the newcomer, and also on the receiving community or the receiving society to meet them somewhere in between and to find a way to help everyone integrate. In your own experience working as a city councillor, have you seen certain aspects of inequalities or misrepresentations within the city?
Sadly, yes. I see that some voices are more valued than others, and I see some voices are are more welcome and more celebrated often. And so, I do think the city needs to do more. And one of the places I see a lot of that is actually in terms of levels of income. And so people who have less income or who suffer or live with mental health and addictions issues, often they're discriminated against, sometimes in city processes.
Whether it's in the case of an immigrant or someone battling mental health issues, or just whatever the case is, for marginalized people, we just need to be sure to capture their voices and to have it represented in the community. We need to find people taking action to stand up and to speak and to advocate for a lot of things, which I believe is one of the things that you do, advocacy.
When me and my family moved here, I very quickly became the one to answer the questions and be a translator and a mediator. And then from there, I just tried to advocate for things that I felt was important, things that related to my family, but on a bigger scale, like things having to do with immigration and refugees and people of color. And that's where I my advocacy roots began.
When I hear you talk about what you've been through and having to be and being an advocate for your family within a system that isn't necessarily the most easy to navigate or the most welcoming. Speak English like someone who grew up here. I see how you've become such a strong voice, and that really shines through in your poetry.
On Community Connect, we're always so excited to hear interesting stories such as this, and we'll be right back after this quick break to bring you even more interesting aspects to these beautiful stories.
Hello everyone, this is your host Dheeraj, again on the streets of Victoria. This time asking community a few interesting questions and also seeing how well do they know the celebrities and popular people in pop culture and media. What are the responses? Let's find out. I'm going to give you some names and you have to tell me what countries are these people from. You ready? Former Governor of California, Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Oh, he's European.
He's from Germany. His Schwarzenegger. I believe that is my final answer.
Somewhere in America. America.
It's from Austria. Yeah, Austria.
Rihanna.
U.S. The United States? No, that's wrong. New York?
Canada. Oh, Colombia. I don't know.
Caribbean.
India.
I'm pretty sure she was born in the U.S. I have no idea. The United States? Barbados.
Yeah, Barbados.
That's correct, Barbados. Pamela Anderson.
Oh, she's from here. She's from Ladysmith.
Yeah, apparently she's from Vancouver Island.
She is from Ladysmith and she's from Vancouver Island. Oh my god. Okay, Melania Trump.
Russia.
No, it's one of those Eastern ones in the middle of a bunch that changed names a bunch of times.
I think you asked the wrong person. I have no idea. It's like Eastern country.
Yeah, she's from Slovenia.
Slovenia.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
I'm gonna write that one down.
What is that?
Yugoslavia.
Right a middle phone.
That is not even a country.
Yeah.
That is not even a country. Nelly Furtado.
She's Canadian. Yeah, she's half Canadian, half Portuguese, I think.
Okay.
I went to high school here. It's like nobody was allowed to not know.
Yeah, that's the thing.
They kind of rub it in your face.
Especially if a teacher has taught Nelly Furtado,
like,
they
are
let
you
you
like
know
a bird?
every year. No. They can let you every year.
Do you want to fly away from Victoria like Nelly Furtado?
So many people have blended into this community so well that we do not even realize that they were immigrants at one time. This is Dheeraj, signing off from the streets of Victoria. Until next time.
Welcome back, and thank you for staying connected with us on Community Connect. Today, we are talking to Agatu and Jeremy. Agatu is the City of Victoria's 2018 Youth Poet Laureate, and Jeremy is a councillor with the City of Victoria. Jeremy, so before you became the city's Youth Poet Laureate champion, I know you've done a lot of work, advocacy with your spoken word poetry, and there was a particular time when one of your videos went viral.
For me, poetry is one of the tools I have to express myself about issues I feel passionately about, and also perhaps the most exacting tool to get right to the core of an issue, and gender-based violence, and specifically the role that men play in ending violence and making sure that we aren't causing harm. So yeah, I had this poem, it's called Masks Off, a Challenge to Men, and it's written from a man to other men.
We'll just take a quick minute to check out the video.
It's all too familiar. Fault lines written by tongues bitten by silence. Thoughts formed we weren't searching for violence in our questions, our suggestions. It's all too familiar. What was she wearing? Was she walking alone? She shouldn't have drank so much. She should have been more careful. She like it was her fault. Like gender violence isn't a man's issue. Like men can't help themselves. Like the responsibility for one's own actions doesn't fall on one's own shoulders. Like men don't have the power to change how men act. And I remember as a young teen learning the facts. 1 in 3 made me sick. How could men like me do this? They couldn't. I thought they couldn't. They must be monsters. They must be monsters. Monsters in the masks of men. Monsters in the masks of men. Rearranged their faces until I can no longer see myself in them. Monsters.
So Agatu, as a young black Muslim woman, what do you think the face of gender inequality is at present in the society?
I would call myself a feminist, and there's a lot of different aspects of feminism that I agree with, and I'm on different sides of it at the same time. You know, I'm a black woman, I'm also a Muslim woman, so at the same time I'm advocating for Muslim rights, I'm also advocating for just women's rights in general. So it's kind of finding where I stand with that and what issues I feel that I should speak upon at that moment. Yeah. And with Jeremy's poem, I think it brings to light a very important issue with hypermasculinity and toxic masculinity, and how men might not be able to speak on issues and might not be able to open themselves up and be vulnerable with their emotions.
So Jeremy, in your role as director of the Victorious Voices Youth Art Festival and some of the other portfolios that you hold with the city, how do you ensure that the voices of different marginalized and well-represented groups of people are put into the conversation in making decisions on the council? You
know, they're separate things, but at the same time they are connected. Victorious Voices and City Council, any sort of platform like that. I see my role as being an amplifier. It's not trying to speak for other people, it's trying to create platforms for other people's voice to be heard. And so in terms of Victorious Voices, that's youth in general, but also, you know, we do try to outreach to different pockets of youth that we may not connect. But looking at that, it's just trying to create a space where they can speak safely about the issues they're most passionate about, the things they're going through as young people, and then I guilt trip community leaders into coming and listening, because I think often those voices aren't heard. And that's what I've always done with Victorious Voices, and then with City Council, I think it's the same. You go to where people are at, you meet them where they're at, and then you provide platforms for their voices to be heard, and you make sure that you're not just hearing it, you're also acting on it.
And do you feel sometimes that as much as you try to make sure that the voices of different people are represented, that there are still certain groups and populations that you're not able to cover?
Yeah, like in terms of, you know, Victorious Voices, for example, like there are a lot of youth that have very important things to say and that could use a space to help process through that using art. But because that they're traditionally excluded from the school system and may not be the ones who will be offered the opportunity in the schools.
So Agatha, how would you say your poetry connects with social advocacy?
Well, what I write about is my experiences, and I try just my stories with something larger. And my stories usually have to do what I experienced day to day and memories of me growing up here and how that was a challenge for me. And oftentimes I find that Canada as a whole, we seem more progressive in comparison maybe to our American counterparts. And sometimes I find that if we just start the conversation and we talk about the issues instead of ignoring them and instead of just giving us a pass and, oh, we don't have to deal with them because it's not on such a large scale. So I feel like through my poetry, what I'm trying to do is open up the dialogue and open up the conversation so we can kind of start the road to recovery with that, if that makes sense.
So how do you do that in your day-to-day relationships with youth and just different people within the community at large?
Well, what I try to do is just get as involved as I can. With the Black Student Union, I talk about issues that African Canadians face, Black Canadians face, and it's a very youth-led committee, and we plan things for Black History Month, and with that we're opening up conversations in school about those issues. And then with the Victoria High School Slam team, we open up a number of different dialogues and conversation about mental health, sexism, racism, and then with that we use our poetry to connect and open up that dialogue. And with the mosque and the youth group there, I'm opening up a conversation, and we're opening up a conversation about Muslim women and Muslim issues, and we try and connect that. And I try to connect all of those things in my poetry.
And what would you say the best part of your role as a youth poet is?
I would say the best role is just being given opportunities to not just speak on behalf, but as Jeremy said, amplify those voices and try and connect through this position. And just being given opportunities where I can talk on behalf and speak on behalf of youth through my poetry, and yeah.
And Jeremy, I know that in your role you've become pretty much a mentor to a lot of young people, and there are definitely certain things you'll be looking out for when you connect with people like Agatha. What are the particular skills, values, or essence? What are the particular things you're looking out for?
When I was working to start it, the idea was that through Victoria's Voices, I had the honor of hearing young people speak very passionately, very eloquently about the things that they're going through and about the things that they want to change in the world. And so I thought, well, I sat through a whole bunch of city council meetings, and I was thinking, like, having a youth poet come and do this would shake this up. And it would bring a voice that is often not heard in the city council chambers, and I think, would lend a creative lens to start the meetings, but could also, bring a perspective that is often not heard in those chambers. Always looked for in a youth poet laureate, among also writing and being a good performer and being able to speak to other young people. But so with Agertu specifically, she came into the interview and she was tremendously grounded, and she spoke passionately and eloquently in her poems and also in her interview, and lent a voice that frankly, we don't hear at City Hall, and we need to hear at City Hall. And so it was just perfect fit.
I know Agatha is the youngest poet laureate to have come out of the city. So how do you think a role like that would impact people at that level, that age group? What kind of course do you think it's setting for their lives?
I think it's different for everybody, but one thing that I think is that once people feel heard, they never forget that feeling. And so whether or not young poets ever do poetry again, that may or may not be the point. It's that they've been on stage, they've said what they want to say, and they've been heard and held by an audience in a way that they feel power in their voice. That's the goal. And you don't always succeed, but that's the goal. And I know that for some people over the last 9 years we've been doing this, it has had that impact.
And what specific impact do you see this as having on you personally?
Personally, when I go up and perform poetry at the City Council or just at a smaller scale event, poetry is meant to open yourself up, letting yourself be vulnerable to an audience. And I feel like, to me specifically, that's important, having my voice be heard. not just being an advocate for everyone else's voices, but me personally having that time for myself and having that time to just share my experiences and share and open myself up and letting myself be vulnerable to a crowd and saying, this is what I face. I'm not complaining. I'm not asking for pity. I'm not asking for anything. I'm asking to be heard, and I'm asking for you to listen.
I can only imagine what your life as a counselor in such a dynamic city as Victoria is like.
Well, every day is exciting. Every day is challenging. It's rewarding. Sometimes it's even fun. But looking at what's exciting is getting to meet amazing people like yourselves and getting to hear those ideas and then help bring those ideas to life. That's a real honor, and it's a privilege, and it's one I take very seriously. And then in terms of challenging, it's challenging to go in and try to create change and to go slower than you'd hope.
And Agatha, so I know you're still in high school, and there is a huge demand in your role. How do you manage all of that pressure and just keeping it together?
One of the key parts of my role is reaching out to vulnerable youth, and the main, one of the focal points in my interview was I use my age, which is something that might be seen as a disadvantage, and tried to make it into a positive. And me connecting to vulnerable youth is just me going about my everyday life, me talking to my peers, talking to students, going to school, and just being in those environments where young people are, and that's me connecting to the vulnerable youth.
Right. And what do you think the future holds for you?
Hopefully more poetry and hopefully more opportunities like this, and I can use this as a stepping stone into amazing opportunities like this again.
Agatha, and thank you, Jeremy, for lending your voice to this interesting conversation about community change and finding ways to make a difference from where we are. Some of the incredible voices that help people find a sense of belonging within our community. It was such a great pleasure to have you, Jeremy. It was a pleasure to have you, Agatha. Thank you for joining us. And we hope to connect with you even on future episodes of the show as we bring you even more exciting and interesting things that people do to connect within the community. See you next time.
Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoy watching Community Connect as much as we enjoy bringing it to you. Join us next time as we bring you even more exciting and informative episodes of the show. Let's keep the conversation going. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Email us at communityconnectbc@gmail.com. Until next time.